Right now, there are 42 active wars going on in the world. 9 of those wars account for more than 1,000 deaths per year. The other 33 are less than 1,000 deaths per year. As you look at the course of human history, especially since the birth of Christ, you see that it's not a very good indictment of human behavior. When we look at the first 1,000 years after the birth of Jesus, from his birth up until 1000 AD, the first millennium, there are at least 70 wars recorded by history. Now, history is not as clear. It's a little sketchy back then. But as it becomes more clear history, things don't get any better. They, in fact, seem to roll in the other direction. The next 500 years, from 1000 to 1500 AD, brought at least another 100 wars. And from 1500 to the present day, according to my research, there have been about 500 wars that have gone on. It's interesting, isn't it? For as much as we pride ourselves on how much more advanced and intellectual and sophisticated and technological and global we've become, we seem to be relying more on war and conflict to settle our differences and our issues. It's a prime example of how we live in a world that is filled with sin. It's a reminder to us that we live in a world filled with doom and with death. But we don't have to go through the course of human history and the history of wars to remind ourselves that we're surrounded by a world of conflict and a world of strife. We seem to live in a culture every day that uses language that is adversarial. Anytime we don't like something or we think that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, we declare war on it. The war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on hunger, the war on illiteracy, the war on illegal aliens. One day we need to declare a war on wars, right? And then as we live our lives in our culture and society today, it seems like we're constantly surrounded by things that encourage us to be adversarial. Just going to a major sporting event today, we get frisked going in. Why? Because for some, it's become more than a form of entertainment and escape from life. And do you ever feel like a trip to the mall is an act of war, from fighting for a parking spot to getting into a conflict with a sales associate about whether or not you're getting the right price or whether or not you're getting the sales price? Last week I talked about how, for me, driving can be an act of war. And probably the clearest evidence that we live in a culture that is constantly combative is the abuse of the legal system and how the courts are so overcrowded. But for some, you only need to look a little bit closer to home to see conflict and strife. Some live in homes filled with abuse, filled with things that are horrifying. Others, their homes can't be a safety net or a sanctuary because they live in neighborhoods that are constantly in the midst of violence and conflict. And for some, just getting up and going to work each day, sometimes that feels like an act of war because of a oppressive boss or egomaniacal behavior. In so many different ways as we live our lives in this world, we feel like we're constantly on the defensive. We're constantly on edge. We're constantly feeling like we've got to fight against something. And the sad reality is of our lives is that until Christ comes again, war, conflict, it's going to be a reality. It's part of living in the sinful, broken, fallen world in which we live today. But because he came into the flesh, because he came into the world, our Lord Jesus recognizes this. He understands this. But what he knows even more importantly is that we need something to free us from that. So he gives us his peace. That's why we heard today in the gospel lesson. But the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. There's so much in those words from Jesus. He does not give as the world gives. We know what the world gives. Anxiety, fear, oppression, doom, death. He gives what the world needs. My peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. See, the lack of peace that we have in our lives comes from an absence of the presence of God. Or it comes from those who try to mold God into their own desires and their own expectations and their own wishes. But true peace is found in the presence of God, where God says to us, do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. See, Jesus understood this. He's the perfect example of what to do and what we need in the midst of conflict and war and battles and strife. See, if anyone had the right and the power to strike out at others and go to war, it was Jesus. And yeah, he did stand up against oppression. Yeah, he stood up over and over again against abuses and things that were not right. But even more so, Jesus understood and knew that this world could not find in itself what it needed to find peace. That's why he subjected himself to the humility, to the suffering, to the death of the cross, so he could show the world there is greater hope and there is a place where peace is found. And that's why he gives to us his presence by the power of the Holy Spirit to remind us of his words, my peace I give to you. My peace helps your hearts to not be afraid. See, in order for peace to have a chance in the world, we have to have peace in our hearts. And that's what this time in God's presence is all about. It starts in our baptisms, when God enters into us to give us that peace of his Holy Spirit. And we heard again in our first reading today from Acts of the barrier-breaking power of baptism, as we heard about Lydia being baptized with her family by Peter. Lydia was a well-respected woman in the community, a person of faith, but didn't quite fully get it and know it yet. And there Peter was, baptizing her and her family. And our whole lives are a journey in this baptismal peace that God gives to us. As the world around us lacks so much peace, it's here in this journey, in this presence, that we begin to find peace. And until that day when Christ comes again to put an end to all the war and strife and conflict that surrounds us in this world, we find peace as we gather in the presence of God here in word and sacrament. That's what John was getting at. He came to the culmination of his vision in Revelation. The last words of the Bible are what we hear today, and it's a vision for us of how the world one day, that final day at the second resurrection, will have the peace it needs. And what does John say? I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. No longer in that last day will God's presence be limited to a structure, to a house of worship. The peace of God, the presence of God, will be throughout all. It will be what binds us together in the resurrection to life everlasting. It's what's going to give hope. And what does he go on to say? He talks about the fact that the peace of God and the presence of God that was lost in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve fell into sin, when they were cut off from the tree of life, that in the end times, when there's no more war, the leaves of the tree of life will be for the healing of the nations. The healing of the nations torn apart by war, by conflict, by sin, and by death. I know no one here likes conflict. None of us likes living in a world where we have to be afraid and filled with anxiety. But sadly, that's going to be the reality of our lives until that day when Christ comes again. But until then, we are not without hope. Baptized into Christ, living in his presence, we always have a hope and a peace that cannot be found in this world. It's a peace that surpasses all understanding. And we always have the assurance of a peace that breaks what binds us in this world. Amen.